So we'll start with doing the Hipster Dufus, which I came across when I was looking for carp flies, because I thought we could try to do carp flies this week just for the heck of it. So this is the first attempt at the Hipster Dufus. I'll show you as we go what it involves in terms of hooks and materials and stuff. I think it looks like some corn that's going a little bit weird, which probably works for carp. So then I decided to, so you guys can see it a little better, I'm going to put it on a little bigger hook. And I'll use the lighter material, but I'll put it on a little bigger hook so you can see it. So the original pattern was on size 8 TMC 2437, which is these guys, which is basically like a jig hook. But I happen to have a box of number 6 Gamakatsus, which are a little bit bigger, and we'll use that for this demo purposes. The next thing that you need to put on this thing, and I think because it was a light wire hook and they were going to use eyes, the eyes are black plastic bead chain. And I think they wanted some weight on it to keep it nose down. So what they wanted for a little weight tied on top of the hook in behind the eyes was some 030 lead, which I've got a box of different lead weights here. So this is the 030 stuff. And they say 2 4mm pieces tied on top of the hook. So I didn't measure, and handling 2 4mm pieces is weird. So I take off about 3/4 of an inch, put it down on the bench, put my scissors in the middle and snip them in half, and then tie them on. And and that's a little tricky. So I'll show you how that does. So we start right behind the eye of the hook. The thread is 140 denier wine colored, according to the recipe. And so I've got number 8 aught, which is about the same size as the 140. And so what I do is I go back, I'd say 1/3 of the way back. I need a place to put the lead. And then I'll come forward to about the width of these dumbbell eyes behind the eyes. Now, the eyes that I'm going to use, and I'll put those on in a minute, but the eyes that it calls for are these black plastic bead chain, and I didn't have them in the bigger size. So I'm going to use this stuff for eyes. It's silver bead chain. And what I'll do after I've got them on is I paint them black. So what I want to do is I want to stop the thread about the diameter of the eyeballs back from the eye of the hook. And I'm going to take these 2 little pieces of, and you probably won't even be able to see these 2 little pieces of lead wire, put them in my fingers. You can barely see them there, side by side. And I'll do a little, again, a little wrap behind the eye of the hook with them on top, side by side. So once I've got the pair of them on there, I'll lightly wrap them on top of the hook. Just a few light wraps. And then I'll use my thumb and fingernail to make sure they're side by side on top of the hook, which is what the pattern asks you to do, keep them there. And then I'll cover them up pretty good with thread to make sure they're not going anywhere. There you go. So, and a little bit of a transition at the back. Bring my thread up right in front of those little bits of lead wire. And I'll take my dumbbell eyes and put them in that gap between the lead and where the eye of the hook is, and make a couple of wraps diagonally from back to front, and then from front to back on the over top of the hook. And when I get them cinch down, that's when I would normally, if I'm going to tie a bunch of these, what I would do with them is I would take a whip finish on this and take it out of the vise and paint the eyes. So that's what I'll do for the moment, because I already have a pair of one's eyes that I prepared yesterday. So what I do is take that aside and paint them black. And this is what I would end up with. Okay. My device is not cooperating today. There we go. All right, so that's what it would look like after they're painted. At this point, I'll tie back in right behind the eyes. And I'll come back a little bit. So the first thing we're going to put on here is the back of the body. I have this ice stub. The pattern in online shows a name of some sort of sparkly doubling that I don't have or haven't seen. So I figured ice stub is pretty close. And I have some medium olive, some light olive, which is the one I'm going to use. And I have some brilliant orange, which I am going to use. I also have some stuff that I got from the fishing hole, or Robinson's. It's Carp Dub, and I think this would work really good, but I didn't have it in the bright orange, which is why the pattern that I showed you earlier is darker. But I'll do it with the orange to start with. So the trick with this is don't apply too much on the thread, as it is with much dubbing. You don't want to put too much on the thread because then it gets hard to spin it. And I'll just take little bits, and to make this particular flashy stuff, which doesn't have a lot of fine material in it, stick to the thread, I'm going to put a little wax. I have some professional fly tying dubbing wax that I've had for decades. The first dubbing wax I ever got was with the Calgary Hook and Hackle, and it was beeswax. But I don't have that anymore. So I want to put a little bit on. I don't want big clumps, because I want to be able to shape this body into sort of a ball shape, tapered at front and back. And if you have too much dubbing on the thread, it makes it very difficult to get control over the shape that you want. So once I got that on the thread, slide it up, and then we'll just go around here and go to the back. And I want to go back as far as the hook point and not too much further. I want that exposed hook at the back. So I'll put some more on. This takes a bit of, with this particular dubbing, it's going to take a bit of time to get this ball of orange dubbing at the back. And some more dubbing. So this is just a little bit tedious process. If you had a more fine material chopped up in this, you could probably put it on in bigger chunks and it would still stick to the thread. But because this is pretty spiky artificial material, it doesn't stick together if you put it on in big clumps. So it takes a bit of time, but at least gives you an opportunity to control that size of that ball of thread a little more precisely. And what I want to do is get the maximum size of the ball, the biggest diameter of the ball of thread, to be a little less than hook gap. I think you still want the carp lip to get into the point of the hook. And I don't, and again, I think what Florin was saying is I think carp have relatively small mouths unless they're giant sized. And so you don't want to make an oversized fly, I don't think. So I'm just about there. And I'll take it, big ball there, and I'll take it forward just a little bit into that gap between the ball and the eye. I'm trying to keep this on the last third of the hook, but I want it tapered at both ends a bit. So you see I've got a big fluffy ball there. And then I'm going to take this light colored stuff. This is even a little trickier because this is the real, I don't know whose material this is, but it's really quite spiky. And I'm going to dub this on the thread, and I'm going to fill the space in between there and the eyes with the lighter color. And again, I'm going to put it on here in such a way that it's nice and tight on the thread. Stuff is considerably less fuzzy than the orange, so it's a little tricky to get on that. Maybe a little spit would help. There we go. That's more like it. And I want this fairly tight because at the beginning, because the way the pattern showed, you kind of overlap the red, the orange a little bit. And I don't want a big fuzzy wad of thread going back over the orange. So I'm just going to make a couple of wraps back over the orange and then work my way forward. This is very spiky stuff. And then when I get it to the point where it's just behind the eyes, again, tapered towards the nose here. So you overall end up with sort of a curved ball shape. Nice and tight there. Hi, so there's the back and the front. That's the dubbed body. Now for the part at the front here, these little horns, it says wood duck, but I didn't have any wood ducks, so I'm using Mallard Flank. It said just black and white wing. And so I'm taking wood duck, and I'll take a little bit of stretch that's probably, I'd say 3/16 inches, basically the width of the eyes. And I'll just pull them out and detach them from the stem. And I take it off of one side, and I'm going to keep that stem because I want them on the other side too. And I will turn them so that the curve to them is up and out. And I'll lay them down in between the eyes on the far side of the hook at a diagonal so that the tip of them line up with the back of the body. And I'll do a wrap down that 1, 2, and cinch them down, and there they stick up. And then I take the same piece of Mallard Flank, and I'll take a similar width of material off the opposite side so that it curls the other way. Pull it off and lay it on the near side of the hook at that diagonal angle and lay it down in that right behind the eyes. So you see now I got 2 bits that are pointing in opposite directions up towards the back. Take the butt ends back, a couple of wraps in front, and then get my pull the horns down or pull the wings down and snip off the excess butt ends and snug them down right behind the eye. Now the next trick is the interesting part that I liked about this fly. As I was telling guys earlier, I bought this kit of stuff when Mark Pettijean was in Edmonton many, many years ago. And he uses this stuff to work with CDC. It comes in the kit. You get them individually. This little bench thing is plastic. It's spring loaded. And there's a slot in the middle. And what he used to do is take your CDC feather and poke one or two of them down into that slot, and then trim off this, get the actual fronds, clip it with this other tool I'll show you in a minute, and then trim off the stem. I don't need to use that because I don't want that much CDC. The other little tool that came with that is this thing that is a plastic version of a bulldog clip. It's spring loaded and it's nice and fun. It's got a little bit of a rough edge on the inside here to hold the CDC fronds. Now, CDC is called the canard, which means it's duck butt feather. And the reason you like duck butt feather, it's nice and fluffy, and it has oil in it that helps float. It's just a nice fluffy feather, which is what we want here. Now, what you normally do is you would take a faux feather, and you can see how nice this is. Boy, let's get something behind that. You can see. You can see that it's not very good either. Probably up against my hand is as good as anything. Come on, get in front. There. You can see the light fronds. What you normally do is you would use the clip to just grab close to this, relatively close to the stem like that. And then you trim on the clip side of the stem. And then when you take the stem off, it leaves these little bits of the duck butt sticking out. Now, when you do that, you're left with half a feather. So I've already done a bunch of these. So I have a bunch that are half a feather, and I'm going to reuse them because those darn CDC, good CDC is not cheap, boys. So there's the half of that's left. And I'm going to do the same thing with this half. I'll clip it, just the tips of it, so they're held there. And another thing that came out of the Mark Pettijean clip kit was these long, straight scissors. And what I'll do is I'll just run those along the near side of the stem, between the stem and the clip, and take the stem off. And you can barely see these, but there's little fronds of CDC sticking out. Next trick is to make a dubbing loop. With my finger in the dubbing loop, I'll come in here and I will make a couple of wraps around it. And then on the far side, I'll let that hang. I will take my dubbing twister, this guy here, and I'll slip it in the loop on the side of my finger away from the fly. And then I'll take these fronds and I'll stick the whole clip into the dubbing loop and let go with my finger and then slide it down the tool until it didn't work. This is the tricky part. Use my finger to keep the loop open. Get that stuff in there, in the loop, and get my finger out. And then again, slide it down so that it just grabs the fronds, pull on it with the twister, and then take my tool away. And you can barely see here, there's a bunch of little fronds of stuff sticking out of the loop. Then I'll twist it and go around the fly. Uh-oh, it came out of the loop. Pain in the butt, this one. The other ones went a lot smoother than that. Anyway, doesn't matter. There's not much in the way of material there. just a few light fronds of CDC. And then bring my thread in front of the eyes, turn it off, and hope that everything holds together. So now you see I have these really light fronds of CDC, and because they're white, I can see on the screen, they're really hard to see. Once it's there, I will whip finish. So the key trick with this one is getting those little fronds of CDC to stay in the dubbing loop until you actually get it twisted. And that's it for that. A few fronds sticking out front. There we go. And that's him. I know it's really hard to see, and I don't have anything I can put behind here that makes it easy to see those little white fronds. Might work better with the one that I tied earlier, that you can see a little better what the fronds look like. Light's coming from the wrong direction for that. Doesn't highlight them. But the picture shows, the picture I put in with the post shows it actually pretty well. And I think it's those white fronds are sort of what, gills or something? I have no idea. But that's the way the pattern was done. You can do the same thing probably with darker colors if you wanted. So that's my pattern for the day. There he is. You can see the little white bits sticking out here.
Mm.
And I think the other thing is that with the oil that's in that feather, that CDC, it'll capture little air bubbles and it makes them sparkle a bit. And that's what they used to, that's what Pettijean's patterns all used to use, that process to get those CDC feathers to capture little air bubbles to make it look like it is a live insect. And that's it for me for today. So de-spotlight me. There we go. So that's me for today.
Thank you, Dave. That's a cool looking pattern for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought, and that's just because we've been doing this fly painting for quite some time. I thought we'd do something slightly different.
Well, you know, the trout may go after that as well, so it's worth trying. And
I'll attach a little story about the Pettijean. Petit is petite or little. So the guy's name was Little John, which, if you remember from your Robin Hood days, was a great big guy. The name Petit or Petit is important to me because that's part of my name. My full name is David Richard Pettit, P-E-T-T-E-T, Robinson. And the Pettit is because my father's given name was Pettit Robinson, P-E-T-T-E-T, Robinson. And he was named after his father because his father was, my grandfather was Pettit Robinson. And my great-grandfather, the name Pettit comes back from the maiden name of somebody back in the family, of the wife of Oliver Robinson. So Pettit sort of rings the bell for me. So that's why I'm interested in the name Pettijean, because it has that connection. There you go.
Okay, well, thank you. I did learn new stuff. Well, the next pattern, I'm going to do them in a slightly different order from what the posting was. So I'm going to actually start with
Florin. Sorry, Florin, you're coming across very faintly in your voice for some reason.
that's a new thing because until now it all worked well. Can the rest of you hear me well, or is just Mohammed?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah, we
A
can hear.
little bit softer than normal, but maybe just have to yell louder.
No, I'll bring the good old microphone in. Is this better?
There you go.
Is this better? Okay.
Yeah, that's a little better.
I brought the microphone in. Okay, so Dave, you're gonna have to do a lot of editing here in the middle to delete this extra
Not to
stuff.
worry. These don't get edited. They just go. They just go.
No.
Yes, they go up.
Anyway, okay. So hook and device, bead on the hook, all standard stuff. This is a size 12, 96, 71 mustad, and the bead is a 7/64 of an inch. Brass bead, I don't want to have these too heavy. For lake, I usually like brass beads. For streams, I use tungsten because I want things to sink in the current. The thread is kind of a golden olive Danville. It says 6/0, but this is 70 denier thread, so it's more like the uni 8/0. So if you use uni thread, this is really an 8/0 thread. For some reason, Danville calls this size a 6/0, but it's really fine thread. Okay. So wrap a thread base on the hook. And I'm not using the proper rotary bobbin here, so I'm just kind of improvising. All right, so the first thing is to put on a tail, and the tail is going to be some fibers from a partridge feather. Now, in order to tie this kind of thing, you certainly want a whole skin of partridge, because on the back towards the tail, so these rump feathers have nice long fibers you can use for tails. And towards the neck, this has been a fairly well used skin. Towards the neck, you find the smaller feathers, and I have another piece that broke off the skin. Anyway, it's worth spending the money on a partridge skin because you're going to be using it for many things. So what I do is I take some of the fluff off the base here. The thing is that the partridge is so soft that even these fibers at the tip are going to make a very nice soft tail. So here what you want to do is you want to collect a bundle of these fibers and make sure that you keep your tips as aligned as you possibly can. Just grab them and strip them off the stem. Okay. Now measure something around half. This kind of depends a little bit on the hook you're using as well. So just eyeball it to whatever length of tail you want. And attach it to the hook. Now what I do is I just go and wrap over the remaining fiber all the way. And the other thing that I could have done is when I was back here, so let me repeat this. So let's suppose I'm back here and I want to, now is the time to attach the rib. You'll notice that the tail isn't quite perfectly attached here, but we'll fix that in a moment. The next thing to put on is the rib. I have some fine gold tinsel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start it here at the head. This is not so important on this one because we'll have a dubbed body, but it still helps to maintain a nice even profile. So this way and see what happens now. I'm getting towards the tail with the rib. And I grab the tail fibers and I do the last couple of wraps to attach that tail precisely where I want it to be. Okay, so now I have the ribbing. Do I have an unruly fiber here? Apparently, yes. Now, the best thing to do with these things, you can try it with your fingers, but if that doesn't work very well, and these are fairly fine fibers, it's again As I showed you last time, it's Sally Hansen to the rescue. This time it's the Sally Hansen tweezers. And no, I'm not getting kickbacks from Sally Hansen. Okay. I'm going to just leave this hanging somewhere here on the vise. Grab a little more. Okay. So this is just hanging for ribbing at the end. And then I'm just going to get some dubbing. So what I did is years ago, I took a hair mask and I stripped off all the fuzzy stuff of it. And I tried to get different colors because if you go more in the center of the mask or on the side of the mask, you're going to get slightly different color and quality of hair. So I tried to separate it a little bit and fluffed it all up and kept it in a Ziploc bag. And I've been using it for a long time now already. This is more than 10 years old. And it's really good quality stuff if you make it yourself. You know, it's one of those better than what you can buy type things. And this is just pure Hare here. There's no other additive here. You could put, or you could buy the I think it's sold as Hare's Ear Plus that has a little bit of Antron mixed into it. So anyway, once you're satisfied that you have a little bit of dubbing here, just start building your body, and you can make it as fat or as slender as you like. This is more on the slender side. Keep going. Notice that I still need a little bit of dubbing. It's always better to err on the side of not enough dubbing than too much dubbing. It's much easier to add than to take away. You can still take the dubbing off the thread, but it's not as easy and pleasant as adding another tiny little pinch. So this is a lightweight, lightly dubbed fly. Okay, if you want some fiber sticking, if there are some that are sticking a little too much, well, just take them off. Okay, and now for the ribbing, if there's anything out of place, I'll deal with it later. I just pull on the thread a little bit so I can use the rotary vise and let the thread hang down, and then I just start ribbing. And the reason I like to use the rotary vise for this is it gives me a very nice even rib. And here when I get to the end, if I don't want the thread to get on the wrong side of the wire, I just use one of my fingers, pull on the thread a little bit to the front, and this way I can bring the rib all the way to the head of the fly. Okay. Then secure this nicely and bring out the not so good scissors because there is some metal in here. So cut this with the cheap scissors. I don't want to put these anywhere near wire if I can help it. And now I'm going to go back to the bird, to the partridge skin, and I'm going to look for a little feather that will make a decent collar. So here it is, closer to the neck. I think this is, it's hard. This thing is kind of mangled here. This kind of looks a bit like a wing covered. It's not very easy to distinguish the wings on this skin. So anyway, here's a feather that looks suitable, and by the time I'm done with it, there'll be very little left. So I'm gonna take now and strip most of it away. So a little partridge goes a long way as a rule. Okay, so here we are. That's still a bit much. This is going to be more of a body length fiber. It's pretty hard to get really, really small. There are some tricks one can use. You can see here that if I go almost all the way to the tip, it's still pretty long fibers. Let me strip maybe a little bit more. Okay. Then I'm going to tie in this feather by the tip. This way I get to, so here, this is going to make quite a big collar on this fly. The other thing that I want to do at this point is get my fingers. I have a little cup with water that's sitting on my desk, and I get my fingertips wet. And with the wet fingertips, I go and smooth out these fibers. What this does is, and this is something that is also very useful when you work with Marabou. What this does is it makes the fibers stick to one another, and it makes the tying in and the handling of the feather a lot easier than it would be otherwise. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this feather. I'm going to attach it here. I can pull a little bit on that tip. So I have a little bit of, it's not just bare stem, it's bare stem reinforced with a little bit of fibers. And I'm going to trim this. This is basically the tip of the feather that I just trimmed away. Now, a few more wraps here for extra security. This is pretty delicate stuff, so one wants to handle this with a certain amount of care. And then if I can find it, I need some hackle pliers. I'm going to use this model today. I think you've seen me use this guy before. So what it does is it's a very simple design, but it's extremely effective, and it does not break the stem where the pliers grab the feather. So it just goes in between here. Okay, so now I have the feather, and if my fingers dried up by now, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to pull the bobbin out of the way a little bit, so pull a bit more on the thread. And then with my wet fingers, I'm going to start stroking those fibers back so that I have a nicely folded hackle to wrap on. Okay? So take your time, and then make sure that your stem is not twisting as you wrap. That's the only issue. Just move your hackle pliers such that the fibers keep falling nicely, folded back over the body. Bring this here up. Here with a couple of turns of thread, maybe 3 if you're a bit more concerned it may come undone. Wiggle the bead a little bit, because what happens sometimes when you tie bead heads, there's a gap there, and this side of the bead, it's always a bigger hole than on the front. And sometimes one side of the bead gets wedged against the body, and it'll come loose later, and then you don't know why your fly is coming undone. And that's usually what the cause is. Okay. So now I still have a little bit of a gap here. If your bead is moving, you're not done yet. Okay. And you can see a little bit of this gap here quite well on camera. I'm going to do a few tidy up wraps to make sure that there's nothing. There's a bit of stem sticking out that you could see there, and probably if the fish come close enough and take a close look, they'll see it as well. So fear not, we can cover that up and get a tiny pinch of dubbing. I don't know if this could be too much. We'll see. Just put it on the thread. just want to lightly dab about, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch of thread, just so you can cover up right here in front of the hackle collar and right behind the bead. And this will set everything in place. We'll cover up the little stub of stem that was left. And then it's time for a whip finish. So there's a couple of whip finishes. And given these whip finishes are behind the bead, they're in a nice, safe place, and they usually don't come undone. Okay. And that's your wet. It's kind of a, you'll find this under various categories, flimp, wet fly, whatever. It's essentially a hare's ear with the addition of partridge. Okay. And that's what it looks like.
Mhm.
And that's
How would you
one
fish it, Florin?
floating line in shallow water, like any nymph. Try to strip it in different ways. On an intermediate line in deeper water, you know, on a sinking line. And let it kind of, you know, fall a little bit and then strip a little bit, and, you know, vary the retrieve to see what works. This is a bit of a generic pattern in that it imitates all sorts of things and nothing in particular, you know. So a bit of a universal fly.
Okay.
I'll do one more following the same line of thought. Yes, Dave.
I'm just watching the time because I have to be out of here by about 11 o'clock.
I'll
but
do
it-
the next one much faster because I'm not going to explain anything anymore.
Okay.
Now you know how it's done. It's basically the same idea. And I'll just show it to you real quick. So this time I'm going to use some Marabou. Here's the Marabou. It's the tip of a feather. Now, the very tip of the feather can be a little stiff. So if you think that's a little too much and you want a lot of softness here, just snip off that tip and get rid of it. And then treat the feather the same way. Get it wet so you can handle it properly. Okay, put in a tail. Now I'm going to try to do this more of a damsel thing. So I'll leave the tail a little bit longer. And again, to ensure a slightly more uniform body, I'm going to let the rest of the fibers lie along the hook shank. I also want a rib on this fly. In fact, I want 2 ribs. One rib is going to be my gold tinsel. You can use gold wire instead, whatever you prefer. Attach it here. And let her hang. And the other one is going to be a little bit of pearl crystal flash. And I have here some bits that I've been saving for various purposes. And I'm just going to take 1 fiber of that stuff. I don't know how well it shows. It's fairly fine. Okay, and so both ribs, one is going to be a rib and the other one is going to be a counter rib. Okay. And now that I'm here, I'm going to use a little bit of dubbing. So same idea as before. You can use the hare's ear, or actually let me use something different since I mentioned it. Of course, the one fell down. This is the so-called Hare's Ears Plus, and you can see it's got a bit of sparkle to it. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly sparkly, shiny creature. The only downside of this is that because of the synthetic in it, it's not as nice and soft and easy to dub as the other dubbing was, the pure Hare's Ear. But it's pretty nice stuff. Clearly, I did not take enough. Spread it along the thread, you know, as evenly as you can. The color is not perfectly even either, but I don't think that's a problem. Natural bugs are not picture perfect. Maybe they're in books, but okay. So this is a slightly longer shank. It's a 9672 Mastad, which is a whatever 3x long or 4x long. I don't know what these designations are these days, but it's a slightly longer shank than the previous hook I was using. And there we are. Okay. Now some of these guard hairs are offensively sticking out here, so I'm just gonna trim them off. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to counterwind the Krystal flash first. And the reason is that I want the second rib to go in the same direction as the thread because it's going to be secured better with the tying thread. And that's one. And the second reason is that if I counterwind the Krystal flash, it's going to stick out and be a lot more prominent. And it's easier to secure with the thread, being a softer material. Now I take my second rib. So notice that I'm winding this in the same direction as the thread. Make sure that the tail fibers don't get caught in the process. And if they do, well, I'll just go and clean up at the end. No problem there. So now 3 turns of thread and another couple of turns in front. Make sure the bead is free there. Trim. And then I still have a few minutes left. Should be enough to do a hackle collar. Okay. Now back to the bird for an appropriate hackle feather. Let's see. So here's the feather. Strip, same process as before. And get it a little bit wet. Oops. Need to get the tip wet as well. That will help attaching this properly. Okay, I got a few fibers to start with. They're folded back already, so I'm not gonna bother even cutting that tip off. It's good enough as it is. Okay. Then grab some hackle pliers. Get the thread a little bit out of the way. Fold. You see they're not folding very well. That means they can use a bit more water. Back those fibers and also make sure that your feather stem is not twisting as you're wrapping the collar. So whatever hackle plier you prefer to use, always pay attention to this tendency to have the stem twist on you. Okay, when you brought this to an end, secure this. I'm gonna do one more, just safe side. Then front, trim. Hackle nice and close. And then just a teensy little bit of dubbing, barely a few fibers here, just to cover up the thread. It gives you a nicer finished look to the fly. I don't think it's vital, but should you ever tie these things on camera, the finished product is going to look spiffier if you do this. These are things we normally don't see, but when you zoom in, oh boy, everything shows. So there you go. Couple of whip finishes. Cut. We're done. 4 minutes early,
Yeah, good.
on time, and under budget.
There you go.
This is the Phil Rowley's Gold Bead Damsel, and it's pretty close to what it looks like when it's wet, because the Marabou's still wet, the Partridge still wet, and you can see that the double ribbing here gives a lot of sparkle to that body.
Yeah, that folded hackle technique is one that everybody should learn, because it's useful for a number of fly patterns, particularly if you're ever going to tie the little partridge in orange or partridge in green spiders that the Brits use a lot.
Yeah, and the other technique that everybody should learn is acquiring a cheap plastic cup, pouring some water in it, and avoid licking their fingers when tying, because I don't know what's in some of these feathers, right? But anyway, you can always get enough water to get things wet just the way you want them. And I can tell you that both for doing the folded hackle that Dave was pointing out to, and for actually just for plain old tying with Marabou, it makes the handling of Marabou a lot easier. And the list goes on and on. Woolly buggers, you know, all of these things work a lot easier. Applying dubbing, if your fingers are too dry, the dubbing doesn't go on very well. And just a little bit of water and keeping your fingers moist helps just as well as using, you know, if you do this kind of dubbing where you twist it on the thread. If you just do touch dubbing, of course, you want to use some wax. But,
so the reason
more pattern for next week.
That's good. So the reason I chose this pattern, we talked a little bit about carp fishing the other day, and I wanted a carp fly. And the reason I chose this one, Hipster Dufus, because it has an interesting name. Maybe it'll gather some views. John told me that the pattern that on our YouTube channel that has the most views is, and it's something like 388 views, and it's the Craft Glue Zonker. So I'm going to see if I can find some interesting named patterns for the next little bit. Failing that, what I might do is just pull out the deer hair again and see if I can tie something in deer hair. Somebody was talking about deer hair.
Yeah, we haven't spun deer hair for a long while.
Yeah, so maybe I can think about doing a deer here. Not gonna do
Florin,
any.
Dave, thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Bill.
Thank you,
Okay.
gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
both of you.
All right, guys, take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Hey,
Thank you. Bye now.
bye.
Bye, Bill.
Hey, Bill, take care. Good.
Thanks, guys.
So I'm gonna do this one next week, Dave.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Sounds good. So like a shrimp.
It kind of follows, well, it can be anything you want it to be by changing the color of the body.
Yeah,
Here's another one,
yep.
you know, not as well tied as that, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And I did some with the yellow body. I just went and looked through my collection of sparkle chenilles.
Yeah.
This one is a bit botched. But yeah.
See, you ran short of Marabou there at the front.
No, what happened was I didn't run. I trimmed the Marabou before putting the ribbing on.
Yeah.
And then when I ribbed it, the Marabou slipped out and well, there
There
you
you
go.
That happens.
It
Alrighty.
does happen indeed. So
Well, thanks, Florin.
okay,
better
well,
go.
you have a good one and I'll see you next time.
Yep, we'll talk to you later. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye.